Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on the role of beavers in water catchments. My name is Shaun Dowman. I work for Affinity Water, and I'm very pleased to be joined by two excellent speakers, Archie Ruggles-Brise from Spain's Hall Estate in Essex, and Derek Gow from Dartmoor, beaver ecologist, farmer, and author of Bringing Back the Beaver. So if I just start by giving a brief introduction to what I do for Affinity Water. So I work in the catchment management team, and the remit of the work we do is to kind of understand our catchments, the catchments from which we get drinking water from, and kind of really identify opportunities to do things a bit better ultimately. I think for too long, you know, the standard model in the water industry is that we solve problems by hard engineering, but I think there's been a acknowledgement and a kind of growing effort put into actually doing things a bit smarter in catchments, thinking about nature-based solutions to actually solve some problems such as nutrient pollution of water, pesticides getting into water, but also in this part of the world, you know, we are in a highly water-stressed area. We have a growing population. We don't actually get an awful lot of rainfall. And we've got changing water, obviously changing climate patterns with more intense rainfall. So actually, I think it's going to be really important for us to not only invest in hard engineering solutions to kind of be able to maintain water supply. We've got to have a much better understanding of how our catchments function and put some of that energy and resource into catchments to create a much more sustainable, longer term water supply system. And I think what's really great about nature-based solutions is that there's a whole range of other benefits as well for biodiversity, flood risk management, carbon sequestration. And really, I guess that highlights why we're here at Groundswell, where there's so much good stuff going on around soil management, and you know, plenty of other things. But obviously today's session, I thought it would be really good to focus on beavers as a topic. I suppose my journey into understanding beavers really started at Groundswell a couple of years ago, where I met Archie, and he kindly invited me to visit Spain's Hall Estate, where he'd only, I think, fairly recently introduced the beavers into an enclosure. So I went over and visited, and really it's a bit of a light bulb moment, absolutely mind-blowing to see how those beavers have altered the kind of hydrology of a fairly small woodland stream that you know, for most of the year was dry, and you know, we were seeing kind of sinuosity brought back to that stream, and just wetland habitats created, and really looking at it from a kind of water management perspective, seeing that those beavers doing all good things, the sorts of things that we would want, filtering out sediment, slowing the flow, reducing nutrients. I think these are all things that beavers can do through their activity. So I think there's lots to be interested in and excited about beavers in catchments. So yeah, that's hopefully what we can discuss today, and welcome obviously any questions and discussions on that topic. I suppose it would be remiss of me as chair to not maybe also acknowledge that some people might be concerned about the activities of beavers as well, and it would be interesting to hear any people's thoughts on that as well. So that's enough from me. I'm going to pass over to Archie first, who's got some slides to present. So yeah, without further ado, Archie.
Great, thanks very much, Shaun. As Shaun said, I'm Archie Ruggles-Brise. I run the Spain's Hall Estate in North Essex. Just a little bit about us. So we're a 2,000-acre predominantly farming estate. So we've got about 75% arable land, and then we've got a mixture of ancient broadleaf woodland, a little bit of grassland, and then increasingly some other stuff that we've been doing along it over the last few years. So things like holiday cottages, wildlife photography, and then obviously now beavers as well. So, I mean, the main question is, we're in rural Essex, and really, why did we focus on water? I mean, we get less than 500 mil of rain a year on average. So really, why is water a problem for us? But interestingly, because we are in the part of the catchment where we are, and we've got local problems around flooding in our local village, and it's really incumbent upon me as the estate owner and somebody who manages quite a chunk of land around the village to try and work out whether there's anything we could do about it. The other thing is we get, when we get these intense rainfall events, be they during the summer, be they during the winter, we get sort of problems with the local road network. We're at a crossroads. The village itself is a combination, is where 5 roads meet. So, once that starts flooding, then locally it becomes a bit of an issue. But also then the flooding goes into people's homes and people's businesses. So it's really trying to work out, how do we do this in a way that's the problems are big for our local community, but they're not big enough really to kind of register on the sort of cost benefit for, statutory flood risk management and things like that. So this is kind of where the whole idea started. It's really just trying to understand, is there another way that we can do this that doesn't involve pouring loads of concrete? I mentioned that we're in a slightly unusual position. So in terms of a river catchment, and this is something I would say if anybody's interested in, trying to understand where beavers can fit in and where natural flood management, where nature-based solutions might be appropriate, is you've got to understand your context. You've got to understand where you are. And if you're dealing with water, that means hydrologically work out where in the catchment you are. So the blue bit that you can see on the map here is the River Blackwater catchment. So, the water from our farm flows down and out to the North Sea of Malden. It is, interestingly, an abstraction catchment for Essex and Suffolk water. So they provide drinking water to the south of Essex and parts of the East London, but they don't provide our water. Instead, we get our water from Anglian Water on the right-hand side and Affinity Water, who Shaun works for, on the left-hand side. So we're in this slightly weird situation where actually we get our water, the water we drink doesn't come from the water that lands on our land, but the water that lands on our land then goes for other people to drink. So there's already 2 compelling reasons why we need to be thinking about water on the land. So what do we do? So we put together a kind of nature-based solution for this. And, I'll hold my hands up to the fact that I'm a fundamentally lazy person. And to try and work out if there's something else out there that will do the job that diggers and diesel might otherwise do in terms of flood risk management and a load of other stuff, but also then deliver all these other benefits along the bottom. So trying to restore nature, trying to restore our local rivers, trying to sort of shine a light on some of these alternative solutions. So try and use the materials and expertise we have on farm already to try and make a difference. And then also try and understand, in a farmed landscape, most of the beaver projects, and, I met Derek in my research of this project, is trying to understand, where do beavers work best? And I went around a load of different sort of enclosures and projects and things, and the majority of them, to be fair, were in kind of upland, grazing or moorland type catchments. And I was sort of looking around them going, well, this is great, but this doesn't look like the landscape I'm familiar with. It doesn't look like the landscape we're out here. So it was very much a kind of like, okay, well, I'm a visual person. I like to see how stuff works. So what happens if I bring these things into my land and try and work out, does it work? Do beavers like living here? Would they work? Would they function? Would it be massively different to what I'd seen in, top end of Dartmoor, etc.? And then this happened all at the same time that we were kind of getting a growing kind of move around, payments for environmental services, payments for public goods. My background is working with environmental charities and catchment management. So this is the sort of world that I'm familiar with and comfortable with. But then suddenly public policy kind of started to keep up with us and trying to, Michael Gove sort of sitting there going, yeah, you're all going to be paid for environmental goods without really probably understanding what he was talking about. But it was great. We took those words and we said, look, this is it. So we wanted to provide a kind of example of what this might look like. And then we feed that into looking at payments for ecosystem services more widely. Who else might be in the market to buy the sort of services? And all this comes from a sort of little idea around, an environmental project and using a particularly kind of unusual sort of approach to it, particularly in our area. And we've started to feed all this information and this learning into policy insights. So hopefully the impact of our project is going to go much wider than just us. But I'll also touch on, why this is bigger in terms of our own context as well. So the nuts and bolts of what we did. So we did 2 different types of intervention for the flood risk management side of things. So we built some leaky dams. Leaky dams are a massively posh term for a pile of logs in a ditch. And they are as complicated as they look. I mean, we probably made them more complicated because we wanted to make them straight. If we do this again now, we probably wouldn't even bother. We'd probably just cut some trees down and leave them in the river. It's no more complicated than that. All you're trying to do is try and slow the water down at times of high flow. You're not trying to create an impoundment. You're just trying to create a reconnection to the floodplain. So this is what it does. So, you've got the before picture there on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, sorry. We're in an arable farmed landscape. It's the river that you're looking down the middle there is over deep, it's over wide, it's disconnected from the floodplain. So at times of high flow, there's got to be a huge amount of water going down that river before we get over bank full and we start to use the floodplain for what it was naturally there for. On the right-hand side, this is what happens in flood after we've put the leaky dams in. So you can see that immediately you've got a huge amount more potential storage of water in that landscape than if you just try to keep it in that narrow little channel. I mean, the channel is bigger than it should be, but it's not big enough to contain the kind of high flows we now get. So we in terms of, trying to achieve the thing we set out to achieve, we've started to do this. But the interesting thing with a natural flood management project using kind of man-made stuff is you get the best product on day one. And then it starts to degrade. We've got to maintain these things to keep their efficiency up. That requires maintenance costs. We got a capital grant to put these in, but there's no revenue funding, so there's no maintenance funding for this. So this becomes a cost and a liability over the long term. Not a massive one, admittedly, but it is something to consider if this is going to be kind of the main way we deal with sort of low-level flooding. The other thing we did, and this is why we're here, is we released 2 beavers into a fenced enclosure. We got a license from Natural England. I think we were one of the earliest licensed enclosures, at just the point that they decided to license them. If I'd been a bit quicker off the mark, I might have got them in there without having to go through the paperwork. But whatever we did, we built an enclosure. So we created a 4-hectare woodland enclosure. The beavers are completely enclosed, and they are still there. I'm getting trail camera pictures on my phone at the moment, looking at kits wandering around and beavers wandering around and things like that. So they're still there. We did that in March 2019, and in just over 2 years, they've done this. So on the left-hand side there, you can see Mags, one of our volunteer surveyors, standing in a little tiny streamline through the middle of the wood. This is an example of, we didn't have a lot of water, and most of the water that was in that woodland just disappeared. We had done a very good job of creating a drain, and it sort of disappeared out to sea at Malden. But now what we've got is a permanent impoundment. So we've got a series of dams, a series of ponds, which is even more evident if you look at this picture on the right-hand side. This is the beaver enclosure in flood. Same flood as I showed you with the natural flood management stuff earlier. You can just see the complexity of what we got here. But what you can also see is we've still got that linear drainage channel running right through the middle of the wood. But then every so often you get a straight line across it, and then behind that straight line you get a massive kind of spread of water. And then towards the bottom, what you can see, if you're eagle-eyed, you can see a kind of sinuous black line running along the place. That is the beaver dam that started off as a metre wide and is now probably 35 metres wide, has joined up a number of dams, is creating a kind of multi-level stepped habitat. And then on the left-hand side at the bottom there, you can see this kind of wetland that's just sort of kind of oozing its way into the woodland. And what the beavers are doing there is they're actually digging channels which then fill with water so that they can access food and habitat further away. So what we're getting here is a permanent store of water. And so the moment this started happening, we started thinking, well, hang on a minute, we did this project from a natural flood management project perspective, but look at what the other things are happening. We've now got summer drought insurance here. So we get small amounts of water dribbling out of this beaver wetland continuously over the summer. And it continued to do this all through the last couple of drought periods. And because the beavers are constantly active, they're constantly building structures like this. So you can see their lodge on the left-hand side there, and a number of their dams, and they use the building material that we provide them. So we haven't done anything in that enclosure other than build the fence and put the beavers in. Dig them a very small pond when we first put them in. We built them a little tiny hay bale lodge, which they took one look at and then disappeared off somewhere else. Didn't even use it. That took a day and a half of our lives we're never going to get back. Thanks, Derek. But you can just see they just constantly evolve. They join up the dams. They make them bigger. Days like this, it's kind of threatening to rain. If we get a heavy rainfall event, now I'll go home tomorrow and the beavers will have been out all night, and they will be it's like you flick a switch in their heads and they go out there and they're massively active, and they will suddenly trap water in places you never thought that you could trap water. And it's just constantly evolving. So again, I say, when we do the man-made stuff, you get your best product on day one. When we did the beaver stuff, we got a fence on day one and 2 rodents. And now we've got a massively complicated wetland, which is self-sustaining, self-maintaining. I don't have to pay them. I don't have to feed them. I don't have to tell them what to do. Brilliant estate employees. So this is just, this is the flood that we had. This is our most serious flood in the last 20 years. So almost to the day 20 years ago, in October 2001, we had a flood that went into Finchingfield and flooded the local pubs, and it flooded people's houses. And it's the thing that people remember when we talk about flooding in Finchingfield. They don't remember the kind of little bit of water that went on the road. They remember the beer barrels floating off down the river and the fact that we made it onto the front page of the Sun. Now, when this exact same rainfall event happened, it was pretty much those people that were living in the village at the same time. They said, yeah, no, this is as bad as it was in 2001, but nobody's house flooded, as far as I'm aware, in January this year. We were storing all that water in the beaver enclosure and on our farmland. And to be fair to the farmland, it's going over some crops, it's going over some grassland, but it only has to sit there for about 12 to 24 hours before it then drains out. And actually, it's done no real damage to anything that we want to do, but we've provided a service which is then potentially of value to those people downstream, which is great. And all this kind of hangs around, the data and evidence that we're collecting. So we've built a huge amount of partnerships with people like King's College London that you can see some of Sophia and Mark who've demonstrating some of their sensors and their gear that they've put in the field up at, on Shaun's stand up at Affinity Water. We just say yes. So if people come to us and say, could we survey for bats? Yeah. Could we survey for moss? Yeah, absolutely. Of course you can. Can we do some PhD studies on this, that, and the next thing? Can we, use a handheld LiDAR thing to go and zap some stuff? I don't know what most of this stuff is, but brilliant. Yeah, come on. If it gives us information to help us understand what we've got, how we might manage it, and then how we might optimize our systems going forward, then so much the better. It really doesn't matter. It's not up to me to tell them what to measure. It's up to me to respond to the opportunities that they're offering me. And I think this is something we've all kind of got to get a bit better at doing. And this kind of all hangs around. My other thing is natural capital, ecosystem services. It's trying to understand what we've got, what we could have, how we optimize the system, because we have a managed landscape. How do we change the management of that landscape to optimize for all the sorts of capital? So not just natural capital, but also social capital, human capital, intellectual capital, and then importantly, as we are a business, financial capital as well. And we're facing a load of things that make us uncertain. I look at my business and I say, right, okay, that's my revenue split. So you can see there's 58% of what I get is from farm rents. From my business perspective, that looks to me like an overly large risk, because all of those farmers that are paying me rent are going to be facing all the same challenges that we've all got here today. Reducing BPS, uncertainty around environmental land management, uncertainty around regulatory baselines, things like polluter pays principle that's enshrined in the Environment Bill. How do we respond to that? That's an uncertainty. So I need to look at this and I say, right, okay, how can I ensure my own business financially, but also help my farming tenants to adapt by providing them with opportunities to make revenue streams out of something else that doesn't necessarily just mean growing commodity crops? Because that's the other thing. In our part of the world, we're large-scale commodity crop growers. So we aren't doing local food markets. Most of what we grow disappears off into a blended something, either goes to cam grain or it gets shipped abroad or something. This isn't you sort of, hand to mouth. This isn't local food chain stuff. This is big commodity stuff. Is that sustainable in itself? The other thing we don't really know as a farming estate, I would say, and a lot of us don't know as farmers, do we really understand our wider impact? We might know how many of a few charismatic species we have, but do we really know what impact we've had on the future generation? When I show Beaver Scouts around or groups of school children around, do we really know, how much benefit we're offering them? Could we do that better? Is there more of that we could do? Because actually these guys are our future. And the things that we see on that picture, the kingfishers and the barn owls and things, they're all very charismatic, but there's a whole food web underneath them that we perhaps don't know an awful lot about. So, how do we track those things? And also, how do we articulate it? So we did a natural capital appraisal. So I worked with the consultancy group Atkins, because they had come in and done loads of voluntary work on the Beaver project, looking at sort of hydrology and things like that. And I sat down to them and said, listen, I want to do a natural capital appraisal. I can do some of it, but I want to know, I want to know how many tons per hectare of soil I'm losing. I want to know how many tons of ammonia I'm releasing into the air. I want to know the quantities of these things, of the ecosystem service flows. I'm less worried about the kind of monetary valuation of that, because actually that then comes down to a contractual negotiation between me and somebody else. But if I know how many tons of benefit I can deliver to somebody, or how many, tons of carbon dioxide equivalent I can potentially sequester, then that is a negotiating position for me to flip the whole premise of my estate on its head and say, rather than doing a commodity food first approach, we actually sit there and go, no, our baseline is going to be provision of environmental services, and we'll do the food from the bits on top of that, but we'll do it in a way that's inherently sustainable and in balance. And this is something that, I'm still trying to do, and we're still trying to have negotiations around. But having this understanding and being able to say, I can deliver this much benefit. So, I can have a conversation with Shaun and his colleagues at the water company and say, listen, this is how much water I think we can trap. And, if we do more of this per hectare, this is the benefit you're going to get. If you've got that level of information, then you have a much, much stronger kind of negotiating position. But also you understand, what it means for me, for my business, and you get a fair apportionment of benefit across those people you work with. So this is just another picture of the farm. This is kind of what we get at the moment. So pretty much the only ways we can earn revenue across the farm at the moment are food and fibre production, so the commodity stuff that we do, a little bit of timber, and then some grant money. So things like the river and the hedges. Generally speaking, there's a little bit of grant for hedges and things like that, but most of them just come in as a maintenance cost, so they come off the bottom line. If you look at it from a natural capital perspective and ecosystem services perspective, these are all the positive things that we could be delivering. If we can quantify some of these things, we then understand what the value is for our particular situation in the landscape. And I come back to that map that I put up earlier. From hydrologically, you've got to understand where you are in the catchment, where, will beavers work in my set? If you're in a small upland stream, probably more likely they're going to work than if you're right down almost at the coast. The same thing's true of natural capital and ecosystem services. We are going to be better positioned to deliver some stuff than others, and all of your farms will be in a different position from us. So, if you'll buy a big conurbation, then perhaps public access and well-being is your big earner, or maybe it's air quality or something like that, things that we can't probably offer, being sort of quite remote. And then how do you use this information? So, we use the natural capital information we've got. We use the credibility and the kind of experience we had from using the beavers and using natural flood management techniques to bid into Natural England's biodiversity net gain credits pilot. So we're one of 9 pilot sites in the country where they're testing out the process and the beta metric, looking at how do you measure biodiversity gain. So this is, we are looking very actively to be an offset site for those developments, for those unavoidable losses of habitat in other areas. And this is just a tangible thing. If you're looking for ways to both enable project work on your farm, but also looking at ways that you can underpin your revenue streams in the long term. So we're talking 30 plus years for some of these contracts, for water and carbon contracts as well. If you know what you've got, then you're in a much better position to identify which ones are worth chasing. And this all leads on to, kind of what are we going to do in the future? So where are we going to take this nature-based approach? We're going to do another beaver enclosure. I'm going to make it 10 times the size of the one we've currently got. That is going to be basically a super kidney in the landscape. We're going to be cleaning other people's water. We're going to be delivering both climate mitigation. We're going to be delivering, drought mitigation. We're going to have a massive biodiversity gain from this because we're going to be transferring arable land and kind of drainage channels into something that is just fantastically diverse in all ways. And we're going to be creating woodland, and we're going to be putting in large areas of agroforestry to try and diversify the bits in our fields as well as the bits around our fields. And we're going to be looking at the sort of social inclusion model, and we're going to be working with a charity to try and set up sort of social enterprise businesses based around some of the things that we can do, both the products we might grow, but also the opportunities and training that some of the kind of nature-based approaches might offer. And finally, we're going to be looking back at water, because I can't step too far away from water, because it's what I really love and what I really enjoy. And we're going to be looking at how do we use the whole of our farm as basically a whole farm reservoir. So we're capturing water at the times when there's lots of it about, and we're slowly releasing it, both for our own benefit in terms of supporting our crops and our livelihoods, but also then for the environment and for public water supplies. So there's a whole load of stuff that kind of comes together amongst this. And the beavers are just the thing that gets people interested. The beavers are why I'm here talking to you today, but you can see it's part of a much, much bigger picture. So I hope that's of interest, really.
Brilliant, thank you, Archie. That was fascinating. And yeah, I was back at Spain's Hall. Was it last week or the week before? Yeah, and even in the sort of 18-month gap between when we first visited, seeing how the enclosure has changed in that time, how much bigger the dams have gotten, and how much more sort of complex the wetland ecosystem has got in that time has been really, really fascinating. And I'm really excited to see the new beaver enclosure kind of develop as well. That's really exciting. I think maybe we'll take questions towards the end, and maybe pass on now to Derek for your thoughts, if that's okay.
Yeah, my thoughts are that sitting through the conversation we had with the minister about 45 minutes ago, I was driven to ask him the question, when are we going to stop imprisoning Scottish beavers in English jails? It's crazy. You ask where beavers will fit in, and the answer is in every watercourse that is on this island. It's an animal which should be here. It's an animal which we hunted to extinction because we wanted its scent glands, we wanted its fur, and because the stupid medieval Roman Catholic Church said that because they had scaly tails they were a fish, and we ate them then as well. We don't really understand how profoundly the loss of this creature has affected arid lands. There are no clear records, though some German books suggest there is archaeology of the species in North Africa. But what we do know is that they once were found right the way through the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East and over above the Himalayas into China and Japan. Thousands of years before the birth of Christ, in the time of Zoroastrian laws in Iran, there were fines awarded to people who killed an animal called a water dog, because they understood perfectly well that if you killed the water dogs, which retained the water in the desert, then the deserts advanced and you could never grow crops again. Our understanding of this elementary fact, which when it comes to this creature, we have all but lost. You perhaps see just a little bit of it still left in some of the early North American writings, by people like Eric Collier, who wrote a book called Three Against the Wilderness. Like another man called Archie or Grey Owl, he emigrated to Canada from the British Isles when he was a very young man. And around the time of the First World War, obtained a trapping concession in northwest Canada. He expected to be able to keep his wife and a small child on a small farm on the back of the fur-bearing, of capturing the fur-bearing animals that he believed that existed in numbers around the watershed of the Chilcotin River. But he arrived at a time when something strange had happened. One of the first days when he rode out to see the farm, he witnessed a wildfire running from forests on one mountain range right the way through the valley bottom and off into the distance across the other far mountains. He'd started to look for fur-bearing creatures like the otter and the fisher and the mink and the muskrat, and in the arid valley bottoms, none of those animals occurred anymore. In the rangelands below where the Hereford cattle were, the cattle were bogging themselves down into big sink pits and holes in a desperate struggle to obtain the last of the moisture that was there. And when he spoke eventually, after thinking about this for some considerable time, to his wife's mother, who was a full-blood Indian, she said that none of this was so when the beavers were there. The beavers had been killed out maybe 70 years before. The land was then drained initially by fruit growers, and then by the Chinese, and then by the gold miners. So by the time he arrived there, though you could see some of the structures and features that are typical of beaver-generated landscapes, the beavers are all gone. Read the book. It's a remarkable story. He tried to rebuild the dams himself with his family to retain the water in the creeks. But despite it didn't matter how hard they worked, eventually the dams would always be blown out. Beavers at that time in Canada had been killed in huge numbers in the same way, for more or less the same reasons we exterminated them in Western and Eastern Eurasia. So beavers were hard to come by. And so perhaps it was 20 years before a truck came rumbling up the road towards them, to his complete surprise, from the Forest Department, with a note on the dashboard to say, there are 2 pairs of them here, you look after them, if they die, you're not getting any more. So at a time when we are concerned and we talk about, water, slowing the flow, holding water, preventing flooding, and you just drive the 5 hours that it takes you to get to the arid lands in the east of this country, where in some areas you have less of a per headage water allocation already than you have in Sudan, it's ridiculous that we're not thinking about creating more of the environments like Archie's. Now, when I met Archie, I thought he was a madman. I mean, he showed me this ruined area of plantation which was grazed to buggery by deer. Who was it? Which relative was it that failed with cricket bat willow? I can't remember. Where some relative, in the past had planted a lot of cricket bat willow and they looked sick as hell. And then we were there the day after when the Environment Agency came to electro-fish something that wasn't even I don't know how you describe it. It wasn't a stream. There was a vestigial water body there flowing across mud, and you look at it and think, I'm not sure you're going to catch very many fish. I don't know much about fish, but doesn't look like good fish habitat to me. And the guys from the Environment Agency got out their big Land Rover, walked to the bottom of his property, looked at the main drain that ran through the arable land and said, this is eutrophic, there's nothing alive in here, there's no point in even putting the kit in, we're only going to get it dirty and infected. So we then came up this tiny little side stream into the area where the beavers were going to be, and we caught, on something like 700 yards of stream, 3 bullheads, and that was the fish population. They reckon that 1 escaped, so that meant there might have been 4, and they told us that was a good day. When we start to talk about regenerating landscapes, guys, and we listen to nice presentations, the likes of which FWAG delivered earlier on this morning in their tent, and we talk about a thing called an ecosystem, and we include it in any presentation we use now in this country, we have no idea, no concept, no prospect of knowing what we're talking about. There hasn't been a functional ecosystem in the British Isles since perhaps prior to the Bronze Age, because we've been here, we've dominated this island, and we have destroyed near everything. The great animals have gone. The environments that were vibrant, like the Norfolk Broads, big, humid, singing wetlands full of frogs and gigantic torpedo-like burbot, where grampus came in from the sea and there were colonies of seals in fresh water, we can't even begin to imagine. What we're left now is an environment where even the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil can't cope with the toxins that we're applying. The challenge of recovering this is going to be vast, and I have to be frank in what I'm saying next. Very few of us, and I'm not sure that I do, really comprehend the level of effort that that's going to require. And we cannot do it without this animal. While we bitch and we whine about beaver dams and salmon, which is a facile lie if there ever was one, we are distracted by the charade from the reality of what we must do. They must be everywhere. When you look at Archie's woody debris dams, I looked at some other woody debris dams that the Woodland Trust had put into one of their sites at a place called Smith Hills above Bolton to slow the flow of water significantly down into this major conurbation. It's all terribly worthy. But it's not complex. They're not maintained by the engineers that will work 24 hours a day right the way through a night without a health and safety ethic and without having filled any forms in to do so, to retain the water and the environment they need, because it's in their ecology and their lifeblood and their behaviour. They don't have canals branching out, holding amounts of water which are incalculable. They don't generate sphagnum mosses. You don't have these guys building. Every time the water goes round one end, they don't build. There's nobody there to build another dam and to sustain it and to repair it. They don't create complexity. They don't provide for a deep curtain underwater of complex vegetation and much great timber and woodland complexity as well. We cannot do it without them, and everything that's on the route to their broader return is nothing other than a distraction. When we talk about beavers, when we talk about beaver management, and I've travelled the world more or less to see what they do and to see how people live alongside them, from the west coast of Pacific North America to Russia and the Far East. There are times and in landscapes which are ours, which we've culturally created, in particular in arable landscapes where the drainage falls can be very slight, where the recovery of an animal which was put on God's earth to build dams and impound water makes life difficult. There are things that we've put in landscapes like sewage farms that, we need to have function. So when a giant floating rat comes along and jams a whole lot of vegetation into the outflow and it doesn't work anymore, that's not acceptable. So living with them will mean that at some stage in time we're going to have to have precise, targeted, humane beaver management. It's not going to be a rambunctious hunt. It's going to be something that's thought through before we start. But if we don't live with this animal, we lose very much and we'll never gain, and we won't build a better future for either ourselves, our children, or for nature. So overcoming, those issues is not an impossibility. There are blueprints that have already been developed by the North Americans and the Europeans. All we need to do is translate them into English, because we're not good commonly at reading Serbo-Croat, and then move forward with complete confidence in the knowledge we can do it. So my message to you is that this is, it's a remarkable project. It's a remarkable project in a dry land. As time moves on, as this climate, as this planet warms, we're absolutely going to need this animal, which we've got a tremendously old relationship with on this island. The first people that lived on this island lived in beaver-generated environments because they were secure against the big cats. We've lived with them hand in hand, almost literally, ever since we came down from the trees and our tails dropped off. And now it's time to reforge that great partnership and move forward together to make this island and this planet a better place.
Thanks, Derek. That's great. Really, I don't know, really compelling argument, and hard to argue with any of that, really. But thank you. Happy to just open out to the floor, really, if anyone's got any questions. I believe I use this microphone. Hold on. This could get tricky, actually. Do we have a portable one? Or no.
I'll come here. Okay, so I'm a relatively local, so here to here, on a chalk river, and we are struggling to attract any sort of structural grants to improve the environment of our river, because it's deemed to be heavily modified, because there have been mills every couple of miles for 1,000 years. I live in a mill, one of those mills. The water rushes through the middle of my house, and I've got a 5-acre mill pond. So that's deemed to be heavily modified, so it can only ever be improved to a good ecological potential, whereas a natural river can be improved to good ecological condition, and that attracts all of the things. So now you have this contradiction that you're getting beavers to start changing natural rivers into modified rivers. Because they're saying, oh, well, you can't have any trout in your upper reaches. We won't put any there because they can't swim up and down it. And you have this terrific contradiction. We think that that's nonsense. It's all nonsense. And I've got nothing against beavers, though I'm not sure I want beavers where we are, because we've done the damming already. And it would just flood us. You have this contradiction between what some people say is a good river and then will help improve the environment, and then beavers are doing exactly the opposite. How do you deal with that contradiction?
In what sense do you say? In what sense do you say they're doing exactly the opposite? Because
we would like to. We're a river organisation called Revival on the River Island here. And we would like to get, as there were 100 years ago, trout in the upper reaches of the river.
Yeah.
We have an issue where affinity over abstracting sometimes when there are dry periods and our river dries out. So we're at war with not so much affinity but with the Environment Agency to end up with some water in our river all year round. It's a perennial river, it's not a winter water. And then you have trout in it, and then if all the trout die, then we can make a fuss. But we can't put trout in it because they say, oh, well, there's no way for them to swim up there.
I mean, the thing is, again, without all due respect, I mean, my farm, we have Victorian gutters in the bottom of it. And typically in Devon, these were dug, possibly they're medieval channels where the land is all pushed, all the water is pushed to an area, typically at the edge of a field, and it's made to run round it. And these gutters now, through which are maybe, I mean, they can be 2.5, 3 meters wide. They can be 5, 6 meters deep. Are typically as structures eroded right down to the shillet bedrock. They either roar when it rains and do considerable damage to infrastructure downstream, or by the time you get to this time of year, they have no water in them at all. If there are any pools, the pools were originally in the eroded rock, and there might be an odd fish or two in there, which the otters then get with great ease. The beavers that escaped from our holding pens when the badgers freed them from their confinement, and I'm not going to explain that, it's too long a story, but have gone into these drains, and we did not think that given the power of the water in winter, that those animals could build plugs and hold the water steady in the flow that came in winter. And they have done it with great ease. They have built their dams from the shillet right up to the height of the drain, so that's maybe 4 or 5 meters high. They have then extended those dams out across bedrock into the woodland and the pasture on the other side. And I can tell you now, if you sit there on a summer evening, there are wild trout hunting and jumping where no fish could ever swim before because there was no water. So in your situation, you're putting fish in because it's an unsustainable environment for fish. And I'm not saying that's not a desirable thing to do, because we're going to have to put corncrakes back. We're maybe going to have to put twites back. We're maybe going to have to put adders back. There are so many things we're going to have to put back because they're so far away from where they can ever be, and because we have so modified their access route to where they should be. But what I think they do in your river is you wouldn't get gargantuan dams. I don't know your circumstance, and it's probably very much the case that if you're looking at a highly modified human environment, it might be difficult for them to fit in. But what you get, and again this is shown quite clearly in some of the French rivers which are similar, is you get kind of woody weirs that would exist because they want to move in a wee bit of a depth of water through the summer, and then in the winter when there's much water they'd probably go. And the thing I would say at the beginning, it's like what Archie said when he went round to have a look at the animal, is if you have any interest in this, go and look and try to understand, and don't accept some of the shite that floats around with regard to this creature, which comes from people who are ignorant and would have you believe that there is a mythic and inherent risk in it. There's not. It's just not true.
I think just to pick up on a point that Derek said there, it's not. I had that learning process when I went around and I was doing my research and trying to understand, what does a beaver dam look like? And it does not look like anything else in the landscape. It does not look like a concrete weir. It does not act like a concrete weir. They don't fail like human structures, which tend to go in one big whoosh. There's little bits come out. They're incredibly complicated and they are constantly maintained. It is just so different to anything else that we build. Which is partly why the value of what we've done partly on our farm is to be able to compare both what the beavers do and what we did in a kind of sort of analog way, and it's just not the same as anything else. It isn't anything else you'll see in the landscape. So if you get a chance to go out there, go and have a look. We run tours. Excellent, come and see me. But so it's a really good idea to go out and just see for yourself.
Okay, question over here.
So we worked out, I went around and looked at a number of beaver enclosures, and some of the ones that had been done previously I think came in at over £50, £55 a metre. for some of these. I looked around them and took a slightly more pragmatic approach, kind of skinned down some of the bits, beefed up the posts, and because I just wanted it to last. And I think we came in at it was about £26 a metre. Depending on which bit you're looking at, because we reinforced the areas that we thought would be more at risk of, the beavers going through them or trying to tunnel under them. So we went deeper. Our fence is 1,600 metres long and it's dug into 30 centimetres vertically all the way around the enclosure. It's made out of badger wire. It's a substantial fence. And in some areas, we've got the beaver fence on one side of the track and we've got a standard stock net at, £5-6 a metre on the other side of the fence. And you can immediately see the difference. But I would say that that's a cost that is basically a cost of licensing, because if the licensing regime didn't require a certain standard of fencing or wasn't required at all, or you could do different things with it, then that cost would fall away almost immediately. But it works for me because we want to keep the beavers in a certain area. We want to keep them in basically a suboptimal habitat so that they build the dams in an area where normally if we just released the beavers, I think Derek could probably back me up, they probably would have just disappeared back downstream to find deep water and make a habitat. They wouldn't have done what we want them to do. So from our perspective, trying to use them as a kind of natural tool, we need to fence them in because otherwise they'll go and exhibit their natural behaviour somewhere more favourable for them. So we let the water out through the fence and through a 2-metre concrete pipe, so 2 metre long, 30 centimetre diameter. I was looking around, and lots of people, put bits of twin wall through the, in the ditch to try and carry the water, and then put a big cage on the end of it. I thought, sod it, I'd just stick a concrete pipe, stick a piece of bit of weld mesh on the end of it, and job's good. Really simple stuff. It's not that complicated to do. So Derek was very rude about our cricket bats. I've got 60 grand's worth of cricket bat willow in that enclosure, and we have protected almost all of the ones we want to keep with a mixture of sand and adhesive, and we've put little fences around them. It's a woodland enclosure. It's a former woodland. In one time in its existence, it probably would have been a woodland car. So we've got goat willow, we've got alder, we've got poplar. We've got a load of native broadleaves that we replanted after the A7 hurricane in this particular area. So there is loads of vegetation from them. Actually, to an extent that when we're trying to trap them for monitoring purposes, which we try and do sort of annually, it's really hard to get the beavers to come to the traps because they've got so much to eat everywhere else. It doesn't matter how delicious we make the apples and the sweet potato and stuff in there. It's bloody hard to get them to come to the traps because they don't have to. They're perfectly happy in there. They've got loads to eat, and and they'll continue doing that for as long as we're permitted to keep them, really.
But it is, it's purely, as Archie said, it's a requirement of a legislative process, the legality of which, frankly, is unclear. It's a made-up exercise by Natural England to control the distribution of an animal that they felt was getting out of hand. And in the end, it's ridiculous that we're building fences. We're, once again, an international laughingstock, because everybody else, when they want to do things like this, they do the feasibility studies, they look at the habitat, and then they let them go. And here in Britain, we are pansying around with fencing an animal into very small areas that would do considerable good if it were present in the wider environment, and we managed it rationally. So the thing is a charade. That's the reality of it.
Within natural capital, you touched on the general public coming and visiting what we do, and I would suggest that educational side of it is very important. What's your comment on the fact that Natural England over the last 15 years has basically lost interest in educational access as it first started, and we've got something which really isn't fit for purpose?
Having not really, we've never really been in the kind of schemes to an extent where there was, I believe in HLS there was some educational payments to be had and things like that, but we, because of our particular circumstances, we never really got into that. So I can't really speak to the what Natural England do or don't support at the moment. But all I can see at the moment, where we're seeing the world go is that both from a commercial perspective, there is a demand for access to land and access to research and access to well-being things, which is what we're looking at. In terms of public support for that, I think it's all we can do really is wait and see. In terms of farming, is to see what systems, what options are put on the table for payments through environmental land management. And the various different tiers. I mean, I don't have any insights into that any more than I'm sure there's people in the audience that know more about, where this is going to go and how it's going to develop. I would be staggered if there wasn't a reinstatement at some level of support for educational access, but also support for us as people managing the land and farming the land to be able to deliver those stories back in terms of sustainability, in terms of wider benefits. Standing there and looking at your field and saying, well, this is where that crop goes, this is why it's of benefit to you. The reason we're doing this is because it produces more nutrient-rich or nutrient-balanced food and things like that. I think that's probably where we need to go. I slightly get a bit kind of glassy-eyed when we start talking about, well, isn't it bad that we had all these cuts in the past and da-da-da-da. Fine, we are where we are. I think we slightly have to just sort of suck it up and go, well, that's the past, this is the future, let's get on with it and deal with what we're looking forward, which is why, all I do is look forward. We've got 11 generations of history on our farm. We've got plenty of history. History's not going to change unless we rewrite it, and that's really not my interest. I'd rather write the future.
I think that just to finish on that, it's coming. So I was at one project up at Whaley Bridge last week, and the guy who's bought a redundant dairy farm with something like 250 acres have found an excellent person in Natural England who has advised them very well, and part of the extremely lucrative capital works package they've got is for the recreation of permissive footpaths and for education on that land. So it's coming, but it is a terribly difficult. We heard people speak about DEFRA earlier on. Natural England is a terribly difficult organisation to work with. You try and actually find a human being that you can speak to, in that organisation who is over the age of 6, and it's impossible. And the 6-year-olds only ever talk to the other 6-year-olds. But the reality of what you've got, and this is where history is important, is that you had the fracturing of a good nature conservation body, the NCC, which was internationally respected and which did good science in Margaret Thatcher's time, because it had such a consistent track record of opposing other unworthy government developments. Didn't mean to say it wasn't a bit nerdy and insular, but it was smashed in the time of Malcolm Rifkind. You had your 3 devolved nature conservation authorities that came from that, all of which were weakened and basic. And then every single time in the 25 years that separated that single first formative action, when they started to develop a spine and an intelligence capability of worth, they were smashed and reorganised again. So what we have is what politics required us to have, and now we're expecting it to change the world. It's got a 47% budget increase. It has good leadership. There are politicians at the top who really get it and who want to see it change, but it's going to be really difficult.
Just for the record, I work for Natural England, not in licensing and like that.
Just don't start me on that.
I agree with absolutely everything you say, and yes, there are massive challenges ahead, but there are people in Natural England that are happy to support you going forward.
There are some excellent people in Natural England. It still has a residual core of great ability and some fine naturalists and some fine people. But unfortunately, it's not entirely typical of the main draft of the body.
Okay, I think we had a question down here. Yeah.
I was just wondering what the potential down in the flatlands for beavers is, or whether the drainage gradients make it too challenging.
I mean, to my mind, the potential, if you're a beaver, is fantastic. The potential, if you're a farmer trying to keep land that is, 2-3 meters under sea level or, below a perched channel and thing, that's going to be a bit more of a challenge. And I think it's up to us to understand, which bits we want where. What is the most value to society, and how do we either compensate or work with or provide adequate kind of income earning possibilities from, wetlands that aren't growing broccoli or wetlands that aren't growing trees or whatever they might be replacing. I think that's the key challenge. It isn't necessarily for us to say, these areas are completely off limits, because there may well be patches within those areas. I'm thinking the fens is what when you say flatlands, that's what I think of the fens. But a lot of people, when they say flatlands, they think of where I am as well. Essex is massively mountainous, as Derek found out. So it's I think there are opportunities, but I think it is very much we need to try and fit diversity into the landscape, and we need to make space for diversity. And I think that requires policy, and it requires practice, and it requires income and taxation and everything to align around difference, not around similarity. In this country, we're really good at making policy that sees everything the same and doesn't allow for flexibility and doesn't allow for innovation. I think the moment we can kind of break out of that, then we'll see the potential of some of these things in areas where we wouldn't necessarily have kind of put them, but we can make them work.
Yeah, and I think it also depends. If you want a guttural response to that, you go and look at what's happening on the banks of the Tay now, where those animals are being slaughtered left, right and centre, some under licence, commonly without licence, by people who really hate them, in a landscape that does depend on critical drainage falls. The problem with it is that when you kill every animal that's trying to live in your landscape, even the ones that are living in your duck ponds and your nature conservation areas, which are of no concern to you, then all you do as the population grows is you create a perfect cycle of killing, because you kill the ones that are there holding territories and more come back. You kill them and more come back. You kill them and more come back. And there's no intelligent thinking in that. It's shameful that it's been allowed and supported by the statutory nature conservation authorities in Scotland, because these animals are very rare on this island, they're precious, and we should be cultivating them well and moving them to other areas where they would do little harm. If you then if you speak to the Europeans, people like the Bavarians who manage beavers in landscapes that are very highly developed, which are hugely productive from an arable point of view, they will tell you, well, there are two ways of viewing them. One is they're just not fit for these landscapes because their activities oppose us too much. The other is when you look at water pollution in those landscapes and siltation in those landscapes, and you take a map of the Tay and you just try to pinpoint where all the pollution in that river is more or less coming from, it's coming from those arable landscapes. So the idea that we can continue to farm right up to the edge of a watercourse, and that everything we put on that land, it's acceptable for it to run into the watercourse to the point where nothing lives in the watercourse, and then it goes out to the estuaries, the sea, lasts in the silts there for 50 years and kills life out there, is utterly unrealistic. And the intelligent way of viewing beavers in those landscapes is you do what the Bavarians have done. You start to buy up junctions of ditch networks, and you let them live there, and they create kidneys, and although you might not want to drink the water that's coming out the other end in a glass straight from its outflow, it's a damn sight purer when it comes out than when it went in. But that means you have to have a very grown-up attitude to the beavers, whereby you look at targeted intervention and you do not look at the kind of anarchic, whole-scale, cruel slaughter that's happening on the Tay at this point in time.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
I'm very taken by this conversation and clearly taken by the merits of Beavers, and Archie in particular, your slide about insurance, the flooding between 2001 and 2021. There's real value there in terms of less insurance claims, less flooding, all the kind of stuff which is so clear. Someone somewhere at some point must have to pay you for that. That could be Environment Agency, that could be the water companies. I'm just trying to bring an element of commerciality. I mean, about 10 slides long, we saw your very smart pie chart, which said your farming income's coming down from GPS. Beavers must make some money for you at some point. Any views? It's in the panel, I might add.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I think this is what we're trying to do is try and show that there's evidence here. We're trying to gather evidence. We're working with King's College London, who are recording the levels behind those dams. They're recording the depths of water on the fields. They're feeding it into a disaster model called Eco Actuary, which they have developed, which they are then presenting to the insurance industry to make exactly that case. To say, well, in certain situations, natural flood management, not necessarily beavers, but natural flood management in its whole, is more cost effective in certain ways than repairing damage. We've also had conversations with the government's reinsurance company, Flood Re. All of us pay I don't know if you're familiar with Flood Re, but all of us on our home insurance premiums pay a small amount of premium into a central pot, which then goes to cover the flooding element of household insurance policies for those people who have a very high flood risk. So it's basically a subsidised insurance policy for those people in flood risk areas. However, the government set this up so that organisation has to spend itself out of existence by 2033. So it has to reduce the risk at those receptor properties to such a degree that the main insurance industry can then pick up that portion of the insurance again. And how can they do that? Well, they put in plastic front doors, they put in flood protection shields and things like this. But they are also starting to look at, well, actually in some of those areas, Finchingfield, the village we're dealing with here, it's a conservation area. There's grade 1, grade 2 listed buildings. You try and stick a plastic PVC front door on one of those buildings, and I can tell you there won't be just one agency telling you you're not allowed to. So we have to look at a landscape scale stuff. But I have to say the flooding side of things is a really tough one, because the standard insurers, it's counterintuitive. The insurance, if the risk is higher, they just charge you more, and then they build that into their actuarial models, and then they just run the risk profile, and they go, do you know what? Actually, that's fine. If people are willing to pay it, that's fine. It's a market. So there are other ways of looking at this, but the flooding one I think is going to take a while. I think there's probably a bigger scope for public payments for storing floodwater, because the government has a societal responsibility to underwrite risk and even up inequality, or at least they try to. And that's probably a more viable way. But, absolutely. I'm trying to use data, information, valuations to actually make those cases in a way that the person you're talking to, the organisation you're talking to, understands what you're talking about, rather than me talking about it in a kind of farming language or an ENGO language or whatever. Try and understand your counterparty and try and talk to them in their language, because you're going to get a much more viable and much more sort of engaged conversation. But you're absolutely right. Until we start getting paid for this stuff, and it starts being, a choice as to whether you grow a crop or whether you grow floodwater, or you grow butterflies, or you grow something, unless those other alternatives have a viable revenue stream that you can build a business plan against and you can probably borrow against, then it's still this kind of, binary choice between, do I want to do good or do I want to feed myself? Until you get away from that, it's very difficult.
And when you look at, just to finish that, you look at that, the floods in Cumbria of 3-4 years ago in Hebden Bridge, which did so much damage and cost so much money to repair. The last time that I saw an estimate, it suggested it was 65 billion. I'm a member of the NFU, so I get the circulars I'm sure some of you who are members of the NFU get, which tell you to remember, and if you're farming in that landscape, not to forget to claim your £20,000 to get contractors in to tidy up the wood and the rocks and everything else that are on your pastures following the disastrous flooding, but also then to remember to claim your other £20,000 so you can get the same contractors to come in and pull the water courses out higher. So the next time the rain comes, it hits the village even faster. There is a big problem with all this. And if you think about it, farming and the people who farm are a very, very small percentage of the 65 million people that live on this island. By behaving in the way we have done in the past, callously with regard to the interests of other people, we are creating a massive future problem for ourselves. We have to become much more sympathetic and responsive. The idea that we're going to take public money on top of all the other public money we've been given for doing not very much to make sure that Flossie the sheep and its 2 worthless lambs don't get their feet wet when the primary school is 6.5 feet deep in sewage is simply not tenable, I think, for very much longer.
Brilliant. I think that is the perfect point in which to conclude the session.